Hello and welcome to today's episode of Building Brand Gravity. I'm Steve Halsey, your host. With me today is Professor Matt Ragas, I should say full Professor Matt Ragas at DePaul University. He's with our College of Communication where he teaches both graduate and undergraduate programs, courses on business literacy, corporate social responsibility, entrepreneurship, media relations, digital, traditional public relations, you name it, if it's related to comms and advertising. The good professor has been part of that. And I'm really excited to have him on the program today because you better listen to him because, more than 30 colleges and universities around the world are using books that he's co-authored. So, Professor Ragas, it's a pleasure to have you with us here today.
Hey Steve, it's great to see you. It's great to be here. Hopefully, I don't say something that then makes that number go down. We want to grow that number.
Well, we'll make one of our KPIs. Do we add more colleges and universities to this? And I think really the best way to do that is just really kind of share your perspective. I mean, you've had a really interesting academic career. You've been published tremendously, not just the books that you've co-authored, but in professional publications. You've really demonstrated a very just a passion for communications. I also know you're a member of the Page Society of Leading Communicators. So maybe we start a little bit there. What fuels your passion about the communications industry, and makes you want to share that with students and professionals?
Well, I think to start off, I would say being a professor in many ways is a calling. And so I think you know that prior to going back to school and doing my doctorate and becoming a little assistant professor to start things off, I did have a career in financial communications and business publishing. And what's really rewarding, and I know you know this because you also do a fair amount of mentoring and working with your own team and then giving back externally. I really think when you're a teacher and a mentor, you have the opportunity to give back and positively shape. It's a privilege. I get to work with a lot of the future leaders of our business. We've been fortunate have are rising up the ranks and have come out of Chicago as a major agency and corporate and nonprofit and cultural hub, and so to get to use Chicago as my classroom and laboratory and launching point for my teaching and research this past now 13 years has really been a gift.
We were talking a little bit earlier just about your research, and I know that you're regularly talking to the top communicators around the world, agency, corporate, other professors, using that to inform your coursework and your books. What are you hearing? What's on the mind of the top communicators right now?
Well, it's interesting. When we're recording this right now, I'm actually teaching a graduate seminar on the future of what we call professional communication or ProCom, which is a graduate program I lead. And one of those quarter long assignments is called Crystal Ball Conversations. And yes, you can get crystal balls on Etsy. Big fan of Etsy. And so I've been interviewing different senior leaders, folks that we both know. And it's interesting to have this conversation today because I've just concluded in the past couple of weeks interviews with 8 senior leaders. And there's definitely some overlapping themes. And I would say the really big theme, Steve, right now is we have been arguing for decades, as you know, that we need to have a seat at the table to do our jobs, and be the most effective and be strategic counselors and advisors and not simply technicians. We need a seat. And the senior folks consistently that I talked to said, that's great. We're getting that seat at the table. But now what do we do with it? Right? Are we going to take advantage of this opportunity? Are we going to squander it? Are we going to add value actually as counselors and advisors? Do we understand enough about the business and our clients and society to really be able to serve and stay in that counselor and advisor capacity? And I know we're going to talk about this some. Our business is shifting from we've always got to be good at words and messages, crafting and sending effective messages. But hopefully, we're reaching a stage in the evolution of our business where we're going to actually be counseling the actions and behaviors and the policies that we then communicate to our stakeholders through messaging.
Well, you know what I think is kind of interesting about that point is, again, thinking about when I began my career in, the age of the dinosaurs, where you would write a press release, you would put it in an envelope, you would call the journalist, say, "Hey, I'm going to send you something, be on the look for it." You mailed it. 3 to 5 days later, you called up and said, "Hey, did you get that information I sent you?" You would have a discussion, and it was a very kind of paced dialogue. But we are in such a hyper connected, hyper always on to the second world. Communications and messaging as they used to be are no longer, because when you think about corporate reputation or you think about corporate brand, that's defined by every single interaction. So while things in the past may have been siloed in departments or businesses or HR or different type of communications, now all of that is falling under the purview of the CCO. So as you're talking to them, I mean, are they feeling confident? Are they feeling overwhelmed? Are they what are they feeling? So if they want to seize the opportunity, they've got to recognize the opportunity and they got to be motivated to take it.
Well, you know what? I'll take a step back, and before I answer the feelings part, an observation. I think you've noticed this too, that the titles of those CCO and top jobs are shifting to meet, I think, the reality of the always on and complex world we're in. So you're seeing corporate affairs pop up in more titles, which seems to imply then that government relations, government affairs, and policy falls under it. You're seeing more integrated functions of a chief communications and marketing officer. You're seeing, and this aligns with Page Society thought leadership, you're seeing brand sometimes explicitly in the titles of these senior folks, because their responsibilities, it is more holistic, right? And just operating in silos is not going to cut it. To how they feel, I think there's a fair degree of optimism when you ask about the future of our business. And I think if we think back, and we're not talking as much these days about reputation, right? We're talking a lot about brand and purpose and values and ESG. If we went back 10 or 20 years ago, we were still trying to make the business case for why our function deserved that seat and role at the table and the value that we could add. And I think the rise of ESG, stakeholder capitalism, purpose, this has permeated boardrooms and C-suites. And so I actually think it's giving us more of an opening to shine. And to link it up, we joked about at the beginning KPIs. There's KPIs we can link up, and there's more measurable ways now to show tangible impact. So I tell my students a lot of times, hey, like your forebears, the Steves of the world, the guys that were sending mailing, and maybe you were using fax machines too. They
Fax
did a lot
blast,
of heavy.
fax blast, professor.
Hey, that was a in the IR world, that was a high end service, Steve. That was billable. um, there's been a lot of heavy lifting that's been done to get these rising leaders to, I think, a clearer path in many ways than we've had in many years.
Well, and I think as you talk through that, there was a big shift, again, thinking about discussions about the role and the function of senior communicators. You know, Several years ago, the conversation was very much about, well, we should have a seat at the table because we're the corporate conscience. We're talking to these audiences. We're studying what they're talking about on social media. And really, I think when you look at the convergence of things, like you said about ESG, the rapid pace of technology, um, you know, you're really having what once was a role of corporate conscious, which is really more of a core corporate strategy. And you think about, the strategic advisors to the CEO, you know, comms is part of everything that happens within a corporation in a way that it never has before. So I guess one of the things I'd be interested in from a couple perspective, one from what you're hearing from the professionals you're talking about, and then secondly, as you're thinking about how do you educate and train the next generation. To me, it seems like there's two kind of categories at skill sets or competencies that CCOs need to have if they're going to be successful in that seat at the table. One is kind of what I'm calling executive skill sets: critical thinking, business acumen, outcome-based focus, ability to influence, the C-suite, ability to negotiate, ability to bring kind of 360-degree world. Those are really executive level competencies for anybody in the C-suite. But then there's kind of required skill sets either among themselves or in their team to think about deeper audience understanding, channel management, ability to create compelling content, whether it's B2B, B2C, or some hybrid version, and the ability to tap analytics and then now co-create. So that's an awful lot to kind of put in there in the two categories of executive skill set and comm skill set. So how do you build up a competency in that? And then from your role as a professor, how do you teach about those different skill sets?
Yeah, I really like kind of thinking of it in terms of executive skill sets versus comm skill sets. Almost you can think of the latter as almost the meat and potatoes or the bread and butter, sort of the table stakes that you've got to have. And so at an undergraduate level and even at a graduate level, the comm skill sets we shouldn't dismiss in terms of training and development. Because one thing I would say that senior folks in the business, like you, Steve, will that are the hiring managers and the ultimate bosses, will complain about is the level of writing and editing skills, or the lack of strong writing and editing skills. And see, I think that's also tied then to good writers are generally good critical thinkers, and then extend it further even to problem solving or not. And so that is something that is fundamental, I think, as educators, or as if you're a trainer, learning and development person. That's really core, and so I think that still needs to be part of every class, not just a writing class. And of course, we also having just developed a new graduate program, professional communication. We had those fascinating discussions. We did the focus groups with hiring managers and senior folks and mid-level folks in our business on how do you level up. And so we have a digital media skills class because we're all content creators now on some level, right? But we also have a chief communication officer, business advisor, and counselor course, right? That is part of our curriculum. The other thing that I would say COVID has really put center stage, and maybe we can talk about this, is the rise of employee engagement and internal communication. As you know, for many years, it was kind of that stepchild, right? And the external comms and the media relations was really the bread and butter. And maybe I see that even more because I work with young people every day. But we built multiple classes into our curriculum focused on effective teams and effective internal communications and employee engagement, because to live out these priorities, whether ESG or purpose, employees are core to carrying out these missions, or getting employee activism, right? I don't think is going away. Even if the economy is cooling, that's a reality that can impede the progress of our clients and organizations.
Yeah, and employee engagement used to be pretty much the playground of human resources. It was very much about you know what are these engagement scores, how are we progressing, and as you've talked about, the impact of COVID and particularly among the creative class or the class that doesn't need to physically be in a location. it's really changed that dynamic. And then you look at, the war for talent, you look at the great resignation, and you see study after study shows that purpose and the ability to live that purpose, people have more options than ever. So if they don't believe in the purpose of the corporation, they can leave, and guess what? Their commute is still down the hall in many cases, right? But I did hear something the other day. I was talking to a chief communications officer at a pretty large multinational, and he kind of used this framework, which kind of ties into what you said. He said, there's one part which is how we work. How do we show the value? What about external comms and how has it changed? How about internal comms? How about integrated comms? Because anything you do internally is going to be externally. And really just talking about how the teams are getting bigger and more complex, and it's less about marketing versus comm and who owns the data. Now it's very much about how we work. And then there's the what we work on, and really the perspective that we're working on very big, core, critical, strategic business issues. It's no longer being the order taker of what do we say. It's those two parts. How do we work? And then what are we working on? And how do we do that as a core advisor to the CEO and the other members of the executive team? And I guess that for me is interesting, even just thinking about your role with undergraduate and the graduate program. How do you start building and then reinforcing that mindset that you always have to grow, you always have to develop, and nothing can be static as a comms professional.
It's interesting, and I think you've probably seen this with maybe some of the young people at GNS. Is most curriculums will have a campaigns class, right? Whether it's a Stratcom campaigns or a PR campaigns, and occasionally you hear from a young person, well, I already took the campaigns class. Why am I doing something that seems like a campaign, professor, in your public relations and advertising entrepreneurs class? And the answer to that is, well, we're in the business of problem solving and trying to come up with solutions. And I think the way to help develop future leaders is through hands-on practical and experiential learning. And so it's something that not just at DePaul, but I think public relations faculty, we've gotten the message from hiring managers and senior leaders like yourself, Steve. And so we try to do a lot of projects that have real world clients and who have problems that we can use communication to help solve. And they don't always have a clear answer or a clear path, because we are in this age of, as you know, agility, and there's not always straight lines, and there's not paint by number answers to things. And so I think it's trying to help our younger talent become comfortable with being uncomfortable. Because that's just you talked about this, the velocity and pace of change. And who would have think about the events of the last 36 months? And anyone that says they could have predicted, that sequence of events is kidding themselves. And so part of our job, as we develop talent, again, I really think is getting them comfortable with the uncomfortable. And because generationally, I think sometimes younger people might feel more comfortably with it, probably older folks too, with having a really clear step, a sequential flowing step of how to march ahead.
Well, I think where the challenge and the opportunity lies, and what I would say to any of your students, whether they're just taking their first class or whether it's your, seasoned people in your masters, is embrace the ability to shape the future. Whether you want to call that transformation or growth and transformation. I think really for me the mindset that I really look for in the professionals, and the mindset I try and give to my clients, is think about your opportunity to shape the way a business operates and what it shows to the world and how it shows up to the world. I think that is really critical, because if you think about it from that lens, Yes, you need skill sets. Yes, you need campaigns. Yes, you need tactics. But ultimately, your purpose as a communicator is then how do you shape the way your company and your organization shows up in the world?
I think that gets right back to the title of this podcast and the idea of the actions and activities of an organization either attracting stakeholders to it or repelling stakeholders in different ways. And I come back again that perhaps there's no more powerful form of communication than actual communication grounded in actions and the alignments of words and deeds. And we're at such an interesting point, right? I mean, think about right before COVID happened, what, a year or two before, you had all the CEOs of the Business Roundtable, right? Really kind of elevate in words, at least, stakeholder capitalism. And this is how we're going to run our business. And so when we're looking towards the future now, um, I think young people look at it it's an interesting mix of optimism as well as then skepticism as a generation. They're optimistic about the future, but they're skeptical then about will the people in power actually kind of practice what they preach.
Well, maybe our rallying cry is a bit of a difference of John F. Kennedy's ask not what you do for your country. Maybe it should be ask how you can shape your business's future. That could be maybe our challenge for the next generation of comms. So as I got ready for the podcast, I was interested, Professor. I went to rate my professor to see how Professor Ragas stacks up.
Oh, geez.
And I gotta say, my friend, you have an average rating of awesome. Of awesome. Not good, not great, not awesome. And I could tell why based on our conversation here. This was just the top quote, so I won't even say it's random. It was just, one that was here, but it said, Matt is by far one of my favorite professors. He arrives to class early. I like that. He gets to know his student and doesn't forget about you either. He's a pleasure to have as a professor and made the material interesting and accessible. He makes you work for the grade, but as long as you do your best, you'll be rewarded. And he gives the best feedback. So anyway, I just wanted to say that I was really pleased, my friend, when I look through rate my professor of awesome. Hopefully this podcast elevates that a little bit.
Remember, we have to grow the number of Ron Culp and I want to grow the number of book adopters. I want you as my publicist for everything in the future, Steve.
Well, we could definitely work on that. Well, I know we're going to have future conversations. I'm planning to have additional podcasts as we go through. One of the things that Professor Ragas and I have also talked about is, we may pull some of his outstanding students to share perspectives of different generations of communicators. So really excited, Matt, to have you on the podcast today. Is there any area we didn't cover that you think we need to hit before we wrap today?
No, I would just say, Steve, that the when you're surrounded by young people each day and have the pleasure to help develop these future leaders, there's a lot of reasons to be optimistic about our business. And, I really like the theme you said of create the future, that you want to create for these organizations. Because I will say, as rising leaders, the employee does have more influence than at any time that I can remember to be able to have a voice internally and externally in helping brands live up to their stated purpose and values. And my last thing is just thanks, Steve, for always being someone that does invest and give back to our profession. It's appreciated, and it's what makes us a great calling.
Well, I appreciate it, and as always, I appreciate the perspective, and I'm sure the listeners of Building Brand Gravity are going to be excited to hear future conversations from us. Professor, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you.